Looking back now, I can see exactly when my fairy tale began to crumble. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No shouting, no slammed doors, no thrown objects. It was much quieter than that. It was in the way Marcus looked at me during his mother's birthday dinner, like I was a stain on his expensive tablecloth that he couldn't quite scrub away. I was serving the dessert I'd spent 3 hours making, a delicate chocolate souffle that his mother had mentioned loving once. Years ago, my hands were steady despite the weight of 12 pairs of eyes watching my every movement. The Blackwood family had a way of making dinner feel like a performance evaluation, and I had learned to move with the practiced grace of someone who knew she was always being judged. "Such a sweet little thing," Mrs. Blackwood said to her friend, not bothering to lower her voice. "Always trying so hard to fit in." The words landed like gentle slaps, each one perfectly calculated to sting, without seeming overtly cruel. I smiled and continued serving, my face a mask of pleasant compliance. This was my life now, 3 years of perfect manners, perfect meals, perfect silence, while they dissected my inadequacies over wine that cost more than I used to make in a month. Marcus caught my eye as I set his portion down. For just a moment, I thought I saw something like guilt flicker across his features. Then his cousin James made a joke about the help getting uppity, and Marcus laughed along with the rest of them. The sound of his laughter felt like a door closing somewhere deep in my chest. I had met Marcus 3.5 years ago at the Grandview Hotel, where I worked as a housekeeper. He was staying in the penthouse suite, and I was part of the team assigned to maintain it. He'd been different then, or maybe I'd been naive enough to believe he was different. He'd actually looked at me when I spoke, listened to my thoughts about the books I found scattered around his room, engaged in conversations that lasted long past when I should have finished my duties. "You are not like the others," he'd told me on our third unofficial meeting, when I'd lingered to discuss a novel I'd seen him reading. "You see things you understand." I should have asked him what others he was referring to. I should have wondered why a millionaire's son was spending so much time talking to the staff, but I was 22 working 3 jobs to pay for night classes, and when someone like Marcus Blackwood told you that you were special, you believed it. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of secret meetings and stolen moments. He'd take me to small cafes across town where none of his friends would see us. Buy me books of poetry, tell me I had a beautiful mind. When he proposed, it was with a ring that made my breath catch and promises of a life I'd never dared to imagine. The wedding had been small, much to his family's relief. They'd made it clear that they viewed our marriage as a temporary lapse in Marcus's judgment, a phase he'd grow out of once the novelty wore off. I told myself their acceptance would come with time, that love would eventually win them over. I was wrong about almost everything. 3 years later, I stood in the kitchen of the Blackwood mansion, washing dishes while the family retired to the sitting room for brandy and cigars. Through the doorway, I could hear them talking about me in the casual dismissive way. People discuss the weather. "She is pretty enough, I suppose," said Marcus's sister Victoria, "but honestly, Marcus, when are you going to admit this was a mistake?" "The girl doesn't even work anymore," added his father. "Just sits around the house all day, spending Marcus's money." I wanted to remind them that Marcus had insisted I quit my jobs after we married, that he'd said he wanted to take care of me, but I had learned that defending myself only made things worse. Instead, I scrubbed the expensive china harder and tried to ignore the familiar burn of humiliation in my throat. Marcus's voice was quieter than the others, but his words carried clearly. "I know. I've been thinking about it too." The plate in my hands slipped, creating a sharp crack against the marble countertop. I held my breath, waiting for someone to comment on the noise, but their conversation continued without interruption. They were discussing my marriage, my future, my life, as if I were a business decision that needed reviewing. That night, I lay awake beside my husband staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, though it had never really felt like ours. Everything in the house belonged to his family, from the imported Italian marble to the portraits of Blackwood ancestors lining the walls. I was a temporary resident in a space that would never be mine. Marcus stirred beside me, and for a moment I thought he might reach for me, might remember the man who used to hold me and tell me we could weather any storm together. Instead, he rolled away, putting more distance between us on the king-sized bed. The next few weeks passed in a blur of increasingly cold shoulders and pointed silences. Marcus began staying late at the office, traveling more frequently for business, finding reasons to be anywhere but home. When he was around, he spoke to me with the polite detachment of someone addressing a stranger. The family's treatment of me shifted from subtle disdain to open hostility. They stopped pretending to include me in conversations. Victoria would walk into rooms and pointedly ignore my presence. His mother began making comments about how much better Marcus had looked during his college years, before he'd gotten distracted by unsuitable influences. I tried to talk to Marcus about it, tried to understand what had changed, but he brushed off my concerns with vague reassurances that meant nothing. "You are being too sensitive," he'd say. "They're just set in their ways." But I knew the truth, even if I couldn't bring myself to fully acknowledge it. I had served my purpose as Marcus's rebellion against his family's expectations, and now that rebellion was over, he was ready to return to the fold, to marry someone who belonged to his world, someone his family could approve of. The end came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Marcus walked in, already dressed in his business suit. He didn't greet me or ask about my day. Instead, he placed a thick manila envelope on the counter between us. "Divorce papers," he said simply, as if he were announcing the weather. "I think it is for the best." I stared at the envelope, my hands frozen around my coffee mug. "Marcus, what?" "You'll be comfortable," he interrupted, his voice brisk and businesslike. "There is a settlement, enough to get you back on your feet. Find a little apartment somewhere, start over." Start over, as if the past 3 years had been a brief detour, rather than my entire adult life, as if I were a summer job he was terminating at the end of the season. "I don't understand," I whispered. Though part of me understood perfectly. Did I do something wrong? For the first time since entering the kitchen, Marcus looked directly at me. What I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or resentment. It was worse, it was indifference. Complete, absolute indifference. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, and his tone was almost kind. "You are just not. This isn't working, we both know it." "I don't know that," I said, finding my voice. "I love you, Marcus. I thought you loved me." He sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. "We had fun, Emma, but we're from different worlds. It was always going to end this way." Different worlds. As if love was something that could only exist between people with identical bank statements and shared trust funds. As if the past 3 years had been an elaborate game of make-believe that was finally coming to an end. "I need you to sign the papers and be out by Friday," he continued, glancing at his watch. "The family is hosting a dinner party this weekend, and it would be awkward if you were still here." Awkward? My presence in the home where I'd lived for 3 years would be awkward for a dinner party. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. "There is a list of apartments in the settlement papers. I had my assistant call around, several are available immediately." He picked up his briefcase, checking his phone. "I've got to go, early meeting." He paused at the kitchen doorway, and for a moment I thought he might say something more. Might remember the man who had once promised to love me forever. Instead, he adjusted his tie and walked away, leaving me alone with the ruins of my life spread across the marble countertop. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The settlement was exactly as generous as he'd promised and as insulting as I'd feared. Enough money to rent a modest apartment and live carefully for several months while I found work. Enough to disappear quietly without causing any trouble for the Blackwood family. Not enough to matter in their world, but enough to make them feel they'd been fair. The divorce grounds were listed as irreconcilable differences, which was accurate in its way. The difference being that I had believed our marriage was real, and they had always known it was temporary. I spent the rest of Tuesday packing my belongings, surprised by how little I had accumulated in 3 years. Most of the clothes Marcus had bought for me seemed too expensive to take, too much like costumes from a play that had finally ended. I stuck to the few items that had been mine before our marriage: some books, a few photographs, the simple jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother. On Wednesday, the movers came to collect the single carload of boxes that represented my entire life. Marcus was conveniently at work, but Mrs. Blackwood made sure to be present for my departure. "I hope you understand that this is for the best," she said, standing in the foyer like a queen dismissing a servant. Marcus has a bright future ahead of him. He needs someone who can support his ambitions, who understands our world. I wanted to ask her what world she thought I came from, what terrible sins I'd committed by loving her son. Instead, I nodded politely and thanked her for her hospitality over the years. Even in my defeat, I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "You are a sweet girl," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "I am sure you'll find someone more suitable to your background." The apartment Marcus's assistant had found for me was clean, small, and utterly anonymous. It was located in a part of town I'd never visited, surrounded by chain restaurants and strip malls. The furniture was basic but functional, the kind of pieces that came from discount stores, and would last just long enough to get someone back on their feet. I sat on the rented couch in my rented living room, surrounded by the boxes that contained my former life, and tried to figure out what came next. The settlement money would last a few months if I was careful, but I needed to find work. The problem was that I'd been out of the job market for 3 years, and my previous experience was in service jobs that paid very little. The bigger problem was that I felt completely empty inside, like someone had scooped out everything that made me who I was, and left only a hollow shell behind. For 3 years, my identity had been tied to being Marcus's wife, to navigating his world, to trying to earn his family's approval. Without that role to play, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I spent the first week in my new apartment barely leaving the couch, surviving on delivery food and mindless television. I knew I was wallowing, but I couldn't seem to stop. Every morning I'd wake up and remember all over again that my marriage was over, that the life I'd built was gone, that I was completely alone in the world. It was during the second week that I found it. I was finally unpacking the last of my boxes, trying to create some sense of home in the sterile space, when I discovered a small manila envelope tucked between the pages of one of my old college textbooks. I didn't recognize it at first. It had been so long since I'd seen my father's handwriting, but when I opened it, his familiar script made my heart skip. Inside were 2 items, a letter addressed to me in his careful penmanship, and a small silver key attached to a leather keychain I remembered from my childhood. The letter was dated 4 years ago, just a few months before his death. As I read it, my hands began to shake. "My darling Emma," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and hopefully it means you are old enough to understand what I am about to tell you. I've spent your entire life trying to give you something I never had, the freedom to choose your own path, to be loved for who you are rather than what you represent. The truth is, sweetheart, our family has money, quite a lot of money, more than you could probably imagine, but I've seen what wealth does to people, how it changes them, how it makes them view others as commodities rather than human beings. I never wanted that for you, so I made a choice. I gave you a normal childhood, a normal life, the chance to develop your own character without the influence of money. I wanted you to learn the value of work, of genuine relationships, of earning respect through your actions rather than your bank account. But I also wanted you to have options. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank on Merchant Street. Box number 847, inside. You'll find documents that will change your life, if you choose to let them. Your grandfather, my father, was Samuel Morrison. He built Morrison Technologies from nothing into one of the largest tech companies in the world. When he died, he left everything to me, and when I die, it all goes to you. You are, my dear daughter, the sole heir to a fortune worth approximately $2.8 billion. I've arranged for the company to be managed by a board of trustees until you come forward to claim your inheritance. They don't know your name or your location. I wanted you to have the choice of when and how to reveal yourself, if you ever choose to do so at all. I hope you never need this, Emma. I hope you've built a beautiful life filled with people who love you for exactly who you are. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where you need options, where you need power, where you need to remind the world that you are not someone to be dismissed or discarded, this is yours. Love always, Dad. I read the letter 3 times before its contents truly sank in. Morrison Technologies. I knew the name, of course. Everyone did. Their logo was on half the devices in my apartment. Their headquarters was the gleaming tower that dominated the downtown skyline, visible even from my new neighborhood. and according to this letter, it was mine. I thought about all the times Marcus and his family had dismissed me as a nobody, a girl from nowhere with nothing to offer. I thought about his mother's condescending smiles, his father's casual cruelty, Marcus's own indifference as he handed me divorce papers, like a termination notice. They had been so certain they knew exactly who I was. They had no idea. That Friday, I took a taxi downtown to First National Bank. My hands were shaking as I presented the key to the bank manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Patterson, who treated me with the polite suspicion reserved for people who clearly didn't belong in the marble and mahogany elegance of the bank's executive floor. Box 847, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He led me to a private room where he used his key along with mine to open the safety deposit box. Inside were dozens of documents, each one more overwhelming than the last. Stock certificates, property deeds, bank statements showing accounts I never knew existed, and at the bottom, a business card for someone named David Chen, attorney at law, with a handwritten note, "Call when you are ready." I sat in that windowless room for over an hour, poring over documents that proved my father's letter was real. Every signature was his, every date stamped by official seals and notarized witnesses. This wasn't some elaborate fantasy. It was the most carefully planned surprise in history. Samuel Morrison had been my grandfather, the shy, gentle man who raised me after my mother died, who worked as a night security guard to pay for my school supplies, who taught me that a person's worth had nothing to do with the size of their bank account. He had been worth nearly $3 billion, and he'd hidden it from me my entire life. When I finally left the bank, I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I walked the 10 blocks to Morrison Technologies headquarters, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that stretched 50 stories into the sky. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at the building that apparently belonged to me, trying to process the impossibility of it all. The building was beautiful in the way that only serious money could create, elegant without being flashy, powerful without being ostentatious. People in expensive suits moved in and out of the lobby with the purposeful efficiency of those who knew they were part of something important. This was my world if I chose to claim it. These were my employees, my responsibility, my empire. The thought was so overwhelming that I had to sit down on a nearby bench to catch my breath. That evening, I called the number on David Chen's business card. He answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call for years. "Miss Morrison," he said, and hearing my real name spoken with such respect made my chest tighten. "I've been hoping to hear from you." We arranged to meet the following Monday at his office. Over the weekend, I researched everything I could about Morrison Technologies, about my grandfather, about the business empire I was apparently set to inherit. What I learned filled me with a mixture of pride and sadness. Samuel Morrison had built his company on principles of innovation and integrity. He'd been known for treating his employees well, for investing in communities, for using technology to solve real problems, rather than simply generate profit. The company had continued to operate according to his values even after his death, guided by the board of trustees my father had appointed. I also learned about his personal life, about the son who had walked away from the family business to live quietly as a single father, who had died in a car accident 4 years ago without ever acknowledging his connection to the Morrison fortune. The articles I found painted my father as something of a mystery, the missing heir who had vanished completely from the world of high society and corporate power. No, I understood why. Monday morning, I put on the most professional outfit I owned, a simple black dress I'd worn to job interviews years ago, and took a taxi to David Chen's office. His firm occupied 2 floors of another downtown high-rise, all dark wood and tasteful art that whispered of serious money and serious power. David Chen was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a handshake that conveyed both warmth and competence. His office overlooked the city, with Morrison Technologies visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Your father was a remarkable man," he said as we settled into leather chairs by the window. "And your grandfather was a legend. I had the privilege of knowing them both." He opened a thick file folder and began walking me through the details of my inheritance. The numbers were so large they felt abstract. $2.8 billion in assets, including Morrison Technologies, real estate holdings across 3 countries, investment portfolios that generated millions in passive income annually. The beauty of your father's arrangement, David explained, is that you have complete control over how and when you claim your inheritance. The trustees have done an excellent job managing the company, and you could theoretically leave them in charge indefinitely while simply collecting dividends. Or you could step in tomorrow and take an active role in running the business. It is entirely up to you. I stared out at the city skyline, at the Morrison Technologies building that dominated the view. What did my father want me to do? David smiled. He wanted you to choose. He believed that by giving you a normal childhood, he'd ensured that whatever choice you made would come from the right place. You wouldn't be driven by greed or ego or family pressure. You'd be driven by your own values and desires. And what do you think I should do? I think, David said carefully, that depends on why you are here now. Your father's instructions were very specific. He said you'd only open that safety deposit box if you needed options. If you needed power. So my question for you, Emma, is this: what do you need power for? The answer came immediately, with a clarity that surprised me. I need people to know they were wrong about me. David nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected to hear. Then let's talk about the best way to make that happen. Over the next 2 hours we discussed strategies. I could make a quiet entrance into the corporate world, attending board meetings and gradually taking control. I could make a splashy public announcement, calling press conferences and asserting my position as the Morrison heir, or I could wait, bide my time, and reveal myself at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. There is something to be said for the element of surprise, David noted. Your father spent 30 years hiding your connection to the Morrison name. No one knows you exist. That is a powerful advantage if you use it wisely. By the time I left his office, I had a plan. It would take patience, careful timing, and more acting ability than I'd ever known I possessed. But when it was finished, Marcus Blackwood and his family would understand exactly who they had dismissed so casually. They thought they knew the story of Emma the housekeeper, Emma the unsuitable wife, Emma the nobody who could be discarded without consequence. They were about to learn they'd gotten the story completely wrong. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in restraint. Every day, I wanted to march into the Morrison Technologies building and claim my rightful place. Every time I saw Marcus's face on a society page, or heard someone mention the Blackwood family, I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops. Instead, I played my part perfectly. I found a job at a small marketing firm, something entry level that would explain my modest lifestyle without raising questions. I kept living in my tiny rental apartment, kept driving my old car, kept being exactly the person everyone expected Emma Morrison to be, but underneath the surface, I was transforming. David introduced me to a carefully selected team of advisors, financial experts, corporate strategists, even an image consultant who helped me develop the subtle confidence that came with knowing your true worth. I spent evenings reading corporate reports and market analyses. I learned about my company, my investments, my responsibilities as the secret owner of a business empire. Most importantly, I learned patience. The moment I'd been waiting for came on a Tuesday in December, at the annual Blackwood Industries holiday party. It was the social event of the season, held at the city's most exclusive hotel, attended by everyone who mattered in the local business community. Under normal circumstances, it was exactly the kind of event that someone like me would never be invited to. But Emma Morrison, marketing associate, wasn't the only person I could be anymore. David had arranged everything perfectly. The Morrison Technologies Board of Trustees would be making a rare public appearance to announce a major new initiative. The press would be there, along with every important business leader in the city, and in the middle of it all, they would introduce the company's previously unknown owner. I spent the afternoon getting ready with the help of the image consultant David had recommended. The transformation was subtle but complete. My hair was styled in an elegant updo. My makeup was professional and polished, and the dress I wore was understated but clearly expensive. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman of substance and power. The hotel ballroom was exactly as I remembered from the few corporate events I'd attended as Marcus's wife. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, waiters in white gloves carrying champagne on silver trays. The Blackwood family held court near the center of the room. Marcus resplendent in his tailored tuxedo, his mother elegant in navy silk. I waited in the lobby until I saw the Morrison Technologies delegation arrive. David was with them, along with the 3 trustees who had been running my company for the past 4 years. They were exactly the kind of people who commanded respect in this world: distinguished, confident, clearly important. "Are you ready?" David asked as I joined their group. I looked through the ballroom doors at the crowd of people who had once made me feel so small and insignificant. "I've been ready for weeks." The announcement was scheduled for 8:30, right in the middle of the evening when everyone would be paying attention. David had timed it perfectly, late enough that the crowd would be relaxed from champagne, early enough that the press would be alert and ready to capture everything. As 8:30 approached, I positioned myself near the back of the room where I could see everything without being easily spotted. Marcus was at the center of a group of his business associates, looking completely at ease in his natural habitat. His parents were nearby, holding court with other members of their social circle. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. The Morrison Technologies CEO, a distinguished man named Robert Hayes, who had been my grandfather's prot fefe, took the stage. The room gradually quieted, as people realized something important was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "Thank you for your attention. Tonight Morrison Technologies is pleased to make an announcement that will reshape our company's future." I felt my heart hammering as the moment approached. Everything I had planned, everything I had worked toward for the past 6 weeks was about to happen. For the past 4 years, our company has been guided by a board of trustees, following the wishes of our founder, Samuel Morrison. Tonight, we're honored to introduce the person who will be taking her rightful place as owner and chairman of Morrison Technologies. The room was completely silent now, everyone straining to see who would be stepping forward to claim one of the city's most powerful positions. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emma Morrison." I stepped forward, my head high, moving through the crowd with the confidence that came from knowing exactly who I was, and what I was worth. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, as people tried to process what they were seeing. I could hear whispers starting, confused murmurs as people tried to place me. But I only had eyes for one group. Marcus stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, staring at me as if I were a ghost. His mother's face had gone completely white. His father looked like someone had just told him the world was ending. I walked onto the stage and shook hands with Robert Hayes, then turned to face the crowd. The ballroom was completely silent except for the rapid clicking of camera shutters as the press corps captured every moment. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "and thank you all for being here tonight." I looked out at the sea of faces, seeing shock, confusion, and dawning recognition as people began to understand who I was, and what this meant. "Many of you may recognize me," I continued, my gaze finding Marcus in the crowd. "Some of you knew me as Emma, the girl who used to work at the Grandview Hotel. Others knew me as Marcus Blackwood's wife." Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. The people around him were staring back and forth between us, trying to understand the connection. "What you didn't know," I said, my voice growing stronger, "is that I am also the daughter of Samuel Morrison Jr. and the granddaughter of Samuel Morrison, the founder of Morrison Technologies. I am the sole heir to the Morrison fortune, and as of tonight, I am stepping forward to claim my place as chairman and owner of this company." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the room erupted in a chaos of voices, camera flashes, and people pushing forward to get a better look. I stood calmly at the podium, watching the scene unfold, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction as I saw the shock and disbelief on the faces that had once looked at me with such condescension. When the initial chaos died down, I continued, "I want to thank the Board of Trustees for their excellent stewardship of my grandfather's legacy. Under their guidance, Morrison Technologies has continued to grow and innovate while staying true to the values of integrity and social responsibility that my grandfather established." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room before landing on Marcus once more. "I also want to thank everyone who helped me understand the importance of staying true to those values, especially the people who taught me that worth isn't measured by bank accounts or family names, but by how we treat others and the choices we make when we think nobody important is watching. The message was clear to anyone who knew our history. Marcus's face had gone from white to red, and I could see him having an urgent whispered conversation with his parents. Morrison Technologies has always been a company that believes in second chances, in seeing the potential in people that others might overlook. Going forward, we'll be expanding our community investment programs and creating new opportunities for people from all backgrounds to participate in our success. As I wrapped up my remarks, the press surged forward with questions. How long had I known about my inheritance? Why had I chosen this moment to reveal myself? What were my plans for the company? I answered their questions with the grace and confidence that came from years of being underestimated. Yes, I had known about my inheritance for several weeks. No, I had not been planning this revelation for long. Circumstances had simply made it the right time to step forward. Yes, I was fully prepared to take an active role in running the company. Through it all, I was aware of Marcus and his family hovering at the edge of the press scrum, clearly wanting to approach but not sure how. When the formal interview portion was over and the crowd began to disperse into smaller groups, Marcus finally made his move. He approached me with the cautious steps of someone walking through a minefield, his face a mask of confusion and dawning realization. "Emma," he said. And my name sounded strange coming from his lips after all these months. I had no idea. I looked at him calmly, feeling nothing like the hurt, desperate woman he had divorced 6 months ago. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, and there was genuine bewilderment in his voice. "We were married for 3 years. Why didn't you ever say anything about this?" The question was so perfectly representative of everything that had gone wrong between us, that I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything, he still didn't understand. "Because I didn't know," I said simply. "My father never told me. He wanted me to have a normal life, to be loved for who I was rather than what I represented." The implications of that statement hung in the air between us. Marcus's face went through several expressions: confusion, realization, and finally, a kind of desperate hope. "Emma, if I had known, if you had known..." "What?" I interrupted gently. "You would have treated me differently. You would have respected me. Your family would have welcomed me." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing the trap his own words had laid for him. "The thing is, Marcus," I continued, "I was exactly the same person then that I am now. The only thing that has changed is what you know about my bank account, and if that is what it would have taken for you to love me, then we never should have been married in the first place." Behind Marcus, I could see his parents approaching, their faces a mixture of shock and something that looked suspiciously like hope. They had spent 3 years treating me like an embarrassing mistake, and now they were realizing that mistake might have been worth nearly $3 billion. "Emma, darling," Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "What a wonderful surprise this is. We had no idea about your background." I looked at her with the same polite interest I might show a stranger. "No, you didn't. But then again, you never asked much about my background, did you? You were so certain you already knew everything about me." The barb hit its mark, and I saw her flinch slightly. But she recovered quickly, slipping into the gracious society hostess role she'd perfected over decades. "Well, we're family," she said, reaching out as if to take my hand. "Of course we want to celebrate your success." "We're family," I corrected gently. Taking a step back, "Marcus and I are divorced. Remember, you were all quite clear that I wasn't suitable for your family. I have no intention of forcing my way back into a place where I was never wanted." The three of them stood there, clearly struggling with how to respond. They had spent months pushing me away, making it clear that I was beneath them, celebrating when Marcus finally got rid of me. Now they were faced with the reality that they had rejected one of the wealthiest women in the country. "Emma, please," Marcus said, his voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. "We made mistakes. I made mistakes, but surely we can't we try to work things out?" I studied his face, seeing desperation there along with something that might have been genuine regret. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old love I'd carried for him, the memory of the man who had once made me believe in fairy tales. Then, I remembered his mother's condescending smiles, his father's casual cruelty, his own indifference as he handed me divorce papers like a termination notice. I remembered sitting alone in my tiny apartment, feeling worthless and discarded, while they moved on with their lives as if I had never existed. I don't think that would be a good idea, I said, my voice kind but final. Some things can't be undone, Marcus. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned. I turned to include his parents in my gaze. I want you all to know that I don't harbor any ill will toward you. You treated me exactly as you saw me, and I can't fault you for that, but I also can't forget it. The dismissal was clear, and after a few more awkward attempts at conversation, they retreated to regroup and figure out how to handle this new reality. I spent the rest of the evening accepting congratulations, meeting new people who were suddenly very interested in getting to know me, and watching the subtle shift in dynamics as word spread throughout the room about who I really was. It was fascinating to see how quickly people's perceptions could change when circumstances shifted, but the most satisfying moment came near the end of the evening, when I was preparing to leave. Marcus approached me one last time, away from the crowd and his family. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet and serious, "I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you could ever forgive me?" I considered the question carefully. The man standing before me looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely sorry for the pain he had caused, but forgiveness was a complicated thing, especially when the hurt ran as deep as mine had. "I think," I said finally, "that forgiveness is something I'll work toward for my own peace of mind, but Marcus, even if I forgive you someday, that doesn't mean I'll forget, and it doesn't mean we can go back to what we were." He nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand, I want you to know that I realize now what I lost, and I am sorry, I am genuinely sorry." I looked at him one last time. This man who had once been my entire world, who had shaped so much of my understanding of love and loss and my own worth. "I believe you are sorry," I said. "And I hope you learn from this. I hope the next woman you fall in love with gets the man who is capable of growth, who has learned what really matters." I left him standing there and walked out into the night, feeling lighter than I had in months. The story of Emma, the discarded wife, was finally over. The story of Emma Morrison, chairman of Morrison Technologies, was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Morrison Technologies, looking out at the city skyline that I was now a part of. The company was thriving under my leadership, the community programs I'd implemented were making a real difference, and I had found a sense of purpose that I'd never experienced before. I still lived modestly, though I'd moved to a nicer apartment with a view of the city. I still drove a reasonable car, still preferred small restaurants to fancy establishments. The difference was that now these choices came from preference rather than necessity, from values rather than limitations. Marcus had married someone else, a woman from his social circle who understood the rules of his world and could navigate them effortlessly. I heard they were happy, and I found that I was genuinely glad for him. People deserve to find their place in the world, even if that place wasn't with me. The most important change, though, was in how I saw myself. I was no longer the girl who needed validation from others, who measured her worth by whether she was accepted by people who had never bothered to truly know her. I was Emma Morrison, a woman who had learned that the most powerful thing you can do is stay true to yourself, even when the world tries to tell you that you are not enough, especially then. Looking back now, I can see that my fairy tale didn't crumble that night at his mother's birthday dinner. That was just the moment when I stopped believing in the wrong fairy tale and started living the right one. The right one was never about being rescued by a prince or accepted by his royal family. It was about discovering that I had been the queen all along.